Hello everyone, this is Lydia, a journalist from AHADU Radio and TV today. I'm excited to speak with Joan Mower, Director, Office of Business Development, United States Agency for Global Media. We will discuss the 2024 American election, global issues, and the value of democracy in the electoral process, as well as democracy building. I look forward to a meaningful conversation that sheds light on election and democratic system. Thank you once again for being here to discuss with me, Joan.
Thank you, Lydia. I'm very excited to talk to you about and your audience, your large audience around the world, about the American elections, which I think is the focus of many news stories and much interest, particularly in America, where we are already voting in our election.
Okay. My first question is, in the upcoming U.S. election, candidates may have differing views of foreign policy. How does your organization ensure that audience worldwide, including in Ethiopia, receive a balanced view of each candidate's stance on foreign affairs?
Thank you for the question, Lydia. I think that basically what we at Voice of America try to do is to what we call fair and balanced. We are always trying to make sure that there is both sides of the page presented. And in the case of our election, we have two different foreign policies. Although I must say, most of our election has not focused on foreign policy, but it is our goal to present the both sides of the issue. I know we have a very robust presence with Ethiopia. We have an Amharic service, a Tigrinya service, a Oromo service, and we try to give, as I say, a balanced picture and make sure that we are not being led by disinformation and not presenting any disinformation to our viewers and our audiences.
Okay. Given the importance of Ethiopia to U.S.-Africa relations, as you know, what role does the organization play in conveying candidates' position on African foreign policy issues, especially in areas like democracy, security, and development?
Yes, well, our agency, Ethiopia, of course, is a huge interest in the United States. I think Ethiopia has the second largest population in Africa, with about 77 million or more. So we're extremely interested in your country. We also have, as you know, a large diaspora population of Ethiopians in America, particularly in Washington, D.C. I think the second largest number of Ethiopians outside Ethiopia live in our city of Washington. So what we attempt to do, obviously, is look at what U.S. foreign policy is towards Ethiopia. Our position, the position of the Biden administration, and I believe will be the position of another Trump administration or a Harris administration, will be to continue investment in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a land-rich country. You have incredibly fertile soil, but also to work with Ethiopia as a partner in diffusing conflicts around the world. Obviously, Ethiopia is on the border with Sudan, one of the great humanitarian disasters right now. You've also got the issues with water and with the dam. And so I think the United States' role is to be an honest broker, is to be fair to Ethiopia, at the same time encouraging investment, ties between the Ethiopian community in America and the Ethiopians in Ethiopia, and really trying to make democracy and fairness a part of the lives of both Americans and Ethiopians.
As you know, with Ethiopia as a key player in the Horn of Africa, how do you ensure that international audience understand both the immediate and long-term impacts of these policies?
I think that the only way to do that is really to cover all of the news that comes out of the forums in the United States. So there are, as you know, many interested players on Capitol Hill who are concerned about Ethiopia, concerned about the Horn of Africa, which has been a difficult area. We have, as you know, in Somalia, one of your neighbors, there's obviously ongoing conflicts with Al-Shabaab. We also the United States is very concerned about Sudan, as I've mentioned. There is a humanitarian disaster underway there. We're very concerned about relations between Ethiopia and Egypt over the water issue and over the dam. So I think what we try to do is be a fair, honest broker, always realizing that Ethiopia is a strong player and a key player in the Horn of Africa.
And how does USA GEMA project reporting on US election outcomes they relate to diplomatic ties with Ethiopia? Are there strategies in place to highlight potential changes in foreign aid, as you mentioned now, security, cooperation, or democracy building efforts?
Right. Thank you for the question, Lydia. I think really what both the Republican and the Democratic Party have emphasized in terms of their policy towards Africa is the need for us to do two things. One is to encourage private investment. Our country, as you've probably read, has a very large debt. We are a rich country, but there are efforts on all sides to cut direct aid, in other words, giveaways to various countries, and more to rely on investment. We're also, as a policy of both Republican and Democratic administrations, there is a concern about the role that China has played in Africa in general, in Ethiopia, in terms of providing loans that then saddle many countries with long-term debt, which has been a problem. So we are also very aware of the competition, if you will, between America and the Chinese in terms of investment, in terms of cultural ties, in terms of propaganda, disinformation. And so that's really where we are.
Given the bipartisan support for international media as a tool for democratic promotion, how does USAGM maintain this cross-party backing while covering potentially divisive topics like US-Ethiopian relations?
Right. Really good question. And I think that, we have a policy. We are just extremely fair. So if you see a story or a broadcast from our agency, I can almost guarantee you that both sides will be presented. So you'll have this many inches for one party and this many for another. Of course, there has to be some judgment sometimes, but basically, the American way is based on our First Amendment, and our First Amendment guarantees freedom of speech. And so we believe that if there's more freedom of speech, if more people know the facts, if more people are informed, they will make the right decisions for themselves and their country. So really, press freedom, openness, the ability to speak your mind, to say what you want, plays a crucial role both from covering Ethiopia to covering local school board politics in the United States.
And how does you guys ensure that its messaging remain aligned with bipartisan values, especially when promoting democracy, when democratical ideas in countries like Ethiopia where political contexts may differ?
Yeah, we have to be very sensitive to other countries, obviously. But I think that the policy of our agency, which is a news agency, is we will not interfere in another country's activities. That's not our role. Our role is to try to give as much information, as much news, as much fact-based news, not disinformation, not misinformation, not propaganda, not messages, but actually what is happening on the ground to the people of the United States and the people of the world and the people of Ethiopia. And we do that by having reporters on the ground. We very much, we screen people who work for us very closely. We don't want partisan people. We want people who are fair, objective journalists. And that's what journalists are. They are the messengers of the people. They are not supposed to take positions. They are not supposed to be aligned with various parties. And in general, we've had a very good track record of doing that in the United States.
Mm-hmm. On election coverage and media independence, how does you ensure balanced and factual reporting during U.S. elections, especially when the political landscape is polarized? And what is countries like Ethiopia learn from this to strengthen media independence in election reporting?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think everybody is very aware of the polarization in our country right now. The the Trump supporters and the Harris supporters often are very at odds with each other. But what we try to do at our agency, and I urge people to go to voanews.com, we try to in our broadcast, in our social media, we try to present both sides. And I think to the extent possible, I think most of our newspaper has done that. I'm sorry, our news organizations have done that. We also have, of course, social media. And social media is a great way. We support social media. All of our platforms are on social media. But social media is a great way for people to catch up with news and information if they're unable to listen to your broadcast or to read a newspaper, for instance.
Addressing disinformation and election integrity is another or one of the most thing. Disinformation can heavily influence public perception and election integrity, as you know. What steps does you take to combat misinformation during election cycle? And what best practice would you recommend for Ethiopian media in managing this issue?
Yeah, great. Again, a really great question and a really tough one because there's obviously been misinformation in the United States about our elections. I think really the only real way to do it is to have an editorial staff that is extremely aware of the possibility of disinformation. And so, and skeptical. That is what a journalist's role is to be. If something doesn't sound right, it probably isn't. And to check. We actually have various programs. We have we have AI programs that are able to check disinformation. But we have stories and people who look at various stories and they analyze those stories and say, this is not true. There's a number of websites that do that. There's one called Snopes. There's a number of organizations, but our agency also takes a very close look at information, the sources of information. There's different ways to look at where the source material came from. Is a photograph fake? Is a story? What's the source of a story? So we spend a lot of time and money and energy making sure that the news we report is factual.
As you know, Joan, voter education is critical to informed participation in any democracy. And how does you support voter education in the US, and what strategies might work well in countries like Ethiopia, where voter engagement varies widely?
Yeah. Again, we have our country is, very much based on one man, one vote. One of the things that has occurred, however, is that there are certain elections where people don't vote; they don't show up. So there are efforts by the government to encourage voter registration, everything from billboards to social media posts to various campaigns. And then there are local organizations, party organizations that also promote voter engagement and try to get people involved. And then there's schools. We at the earliest level in the United States. I remember when my daughter was in the first grade. We learn that the democracy is based on your participation, and if you don't participate, there is no democracy. So I think it starts at the youngest levels, both education, both campaigns, and essentially social engagement. But I do think, Lydia, that you have quite good engagement in Ethiopia in your elections. I mean, from what I know in the past.
Yeah. What oversight mechanism does the US employ to ensure fair and transparent election? And how might similar models be adapted to build trust in the electoral process countries like Ethiopia?
Yeah, really. You'll be hearing a lot on Tuesday night, which is the final day for voting in the United States. Our elections are monitored by states and counties. So what has really happened is there's been just a lot of focus on counties. We have something called poll workers, volunteers in the all over the country. They go to their city hall or they go to their county and they offer to be a poll worker. They're paid a very minimal amount. But what they do is they make sure that people are registered, They make sure that someone is, if I go and say I'm Joan Mower, that I actually have an ID that says I'm Joan Mower. They make sure that the polling places don't erupt. I know there have been in some African countries, there's been a lot of violence at polling places. But we do a very good job at the grassroots level. Again, this is where it's important. Everybody needs to be involved. And so we have numerous poll workers. When I go to vote tomorrow or on Tuesday or tomorrow, there will be a lot of people monitoring, signing me in, making sure that everything's going smoothly, making sure I am who I am, and basically just ensuring that the vote is cast properly, and then the vote is counted properly.
Okay. Free press is vital during election, but many nations struggle with media restrictions. How do you guys address pressures on press freedom, and what advice do you have for Ethiopian journalists facing similar challenges?
Well, we have a whole section that deals with safety and security of the journalists who work for us. We are extremely involved in press freedom issues and press safety issues. My office has done training for journalists around the world on security and safety. Journalism is becoming increasingly a dangerous profession, so we are essentially training journalists on how to protect themselves, how to make sure they're not being followed, how to protect their data, how to use VPNs, how to make sure they're not caught up in a riot. So how to do basic first aid. We've noticed in Africa, a lot of journalists don't have just the basic skills. What do you do if your leg is broken in a riot? How do you fix a cut? What do you do if you're tear gassed? So we've spent a lot of time and money and energy training people, as well as we're very engaged with the international organizations that deal with press freedom and safety, such as the Committee to Protect Journalists, Radio Sans Frontières, Hirondelle Foundation, many organizations that are very involved in trying to make sure that journalists are not the casualties of their jobs.
To the connection between the upcoming election and the peace landscape in Ethiopia, Joan, my first question is, how do you see the outcome of the 2024 American election influencing U.S. policy towards peace and stability in Ethiopia?
Well, I think that probably there won't be much change from what is happening now. I think there will be continued engagement. Neither candidate has spelled out their policies to the degree yet that deals with individual countries. So I think we can assume that the foreign policy will remain for the time being as it is. I think broadly, both parties agree that Africa is the future. I think it's absolutely accurate to say that by 2050, Africa will have more people than India and China combined. We all recognize the young population in Ethiopia. Won't see a lot of Ethiopian policy right away, but we'll have to wait a couple of years probably. Again, both parties support more investment, more engagement with Africa, more people, conflicts that hurt people.
Okay. How might shift in U.S. foreign policy after the election affect ongoing peace effort in Ethiopia?
Well, as I say, after the election, we're just not going to see much change. I think neither candidate has given extreme details about what their policies towards Africa will be. The first Trump administration supported huge investments in Africa, investments of companies. The Biden administration was also very keen about Africa. Kamala Harris has obviously visited Africa. She's African American, part African American by birth, so there's a cultural tie there. But I don't think there's going to be much policy engagement really right, regardless of who wins immediately.
Issues related to Ethiopian peace should U.S. candidate address during their campaign?
Well, I think, again, Ethiopia, they're dealing the focus of our election has very much been on immigrants, illegal immigration, to the extent that Ethiopians are a part of that. I really haven't heard, really the southern border has been an issue, but I haven't really heard of Ethiopians engaged in that. Just more, it's been more a Hispanic issue, more for the southern region. And then we've been involved in our own economy. So the international issues haven't been at the forefront of the campaign, with exception possibly of Ukraine.
Okay. What impact do you believe the election result could have on U.S. support for humanitarian aid in conflict-affected areas of Ethiopia?
At the moment, probably not much. As I say, I think we're going to continue with the policy as it is. The State Department's policy. Our system of government is that we have numerous civil servants. We have people who work all the time for the government. They're not political, and I think that they often run a lot of the policy with the direction from the top. But I don't think we'll have a lot of direction from the top immediately.
On the role of international media in supporting democracies, how does you support international media networks to promote democratic values without being perceived as pushing a foreign agenda? And how might Ethiopian journalists balance their reporting to support democracy while maintaining impartiality?
Right. I think that again, journalists have to leave their personal views at home. They have to put aside who their preference is. They have to put aside their race, their ethnicity, their background, and try to present both sides and try to present both sides fairly. And I think that's what our journalists endeavor to do. I think that press is one of the founders of our country, Thomas Jefferson, said he would rather have a government. He'd rather have a government. See, basically, he said that if you don't have a free press, you don't have government. And I believe that. You really need a press because that's the information to the people goes from the press. So you just need to be fair and balanced. There needs to be reporting on both sides. I don't think it's helpful to have reporters restricted to certain areas. I think there should be a free flow of reporters across the country. That would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, Joan Mower, Director.
I've so enjoyed being with you. I've so enjoyed talking about Ethiopia. And I just want Ethiopians to know that we, at Voice of America, we think about them a lot, and they're very much top of mind. So thank you for this wonderful interview.
Thank you very much. Really nice to see you. Goodbye. Bye.
Yeah.
Dear viewers, we have concluded today's interview with Ms. Moore, focusing on the American election various issues. Thank you very much.